How's it going, guys? This is Real Murata photographer based in Tokyo. So in this video I'll be talking about Voigtlander's Color Skopar F2.8 lens for the Fujifilm's X mount. Hopefully I got the pronunciation correct. If it's wrong, please give me some kind of audio link and how to pronounce the real name, because I do not speak fluent European language, unfortunately. But going a little bit off topic, going back onto topic, earlier this year I basically went to CP Plus, which was sort of like a camera convention that happens every year in Japan, especially in the Yokohama area. And during that time, when I went to that camera convention, I was able to talk with a representative that makes the Cosina Voigtlander series of lens. And if you guys do not know, Cosina, which is a Japanese lens brand or company, owns the Voigtlander brand. And if you guys do not know, Cosina themselves make various types of third-party lenses for the mirrorless camera marketplace. And if you guys do not know, they focus on primarily on manual focus lenses that have a sort of like a film-like look to it. And then over the course of the years, I made two videos regarding on their Voigtlander lenses, the Nikon 35mm F1.2, and after that I made a video of the Ultron 27mm F2, which was by far one of the best lenses that I've ever used in my life. And this is sort of like a follow-up video to that, and this time around, Voigtlander's Color Skopar F2.18mm F2.8. So while I was talking with a representative from Cosina, I initially thought the Color Skopar derived from the Skopar lenses that is famous for its compact, lightweight, easy to carry around for groups of 4 elements type of lens. But it turns out, after talking with the representative, I found out that this Color Skopar is a new, fresh design that they came up with, and also in order to sort of like honor their sort of like lens history, they sort of like brought that name onto their like lineup of their lenses. And this is a complete new redesign of a 7 groups 5 element lens. And I guess you guys probably do not know, but Voigtlander started selling the Skopar series, and later around in 1950 or so, they announced the Color Skopar, because during that period of time, more and more people were shooting with color negatives. So in order to sort of like fulfill those, demand, they kind of refreshed back in the days in the 1950s to make the color come true to life. So they kind of improved the coatings of the lens and added the color name tag to the Skopar lens. So that's a little bit of a historical background. What was rather intriguing was that when I was talking with the representative, they said that this Color Skopar 18mm F2.8 Voigtlander lens is actually an entry-level lens in their Voigtlander lineup. And I actually never thought about it, but when you think about it, 18mm on a full frame is equivalent to a 28mm, which is in my terminologies, sort of like a wide angle lens. So that kind of caught me off guard. So this is basically their entry level lens on their Fujifilm's lineup. So yeah, that's one thing to mention. And I actually brought this Color Skopar Voigtlander lens to Hatoya Hotel, which, if you recall my previous video, I basically shot with my GW690, which is my main film camera. And there were, because if you guys know about like hotels, there's always going to be dark areas, which it's almost impossible to shoot with a film camera. So I basically shot with a Color Skopar lens in those areas, especially like interiors and stuff like that, to showcase the sort of like the possibilities of this lens. And I have to admit that it kind of blew me off guard, because in these types of like hotels or like indoor type of scenes, it's wiser to use a wide angle lens than a telephoto lens, because they're sort of like confined in that environment. And I was also surprised with this lens that, I don't know if it's a camera calibration thing or sort of like it happens automatically, but this lens, the lines look super straight out of the camera. Like I can't see any distortions, or what you call like barrel distortions. Like typically when you shoot with the wide angle lens, you get some kind of like curve when you shoot like straight objects like buildings and stuff like that, skyscrapers. But this lens specifically doesn't have that. I couldn't see that much, or I did not do that much of a post-processing in like, making the lines look straight if you're doing like architectural photography. But that was one area to note. And another area to note about especially the Voigtlander lenses is that if you recall my 35mm f1.2 Nocton and also the Ultron 27mm f2, those two lenses, and especially this lens, all have sunburst effects. And this is sort of like something that some people might like or hate, but I shot like some of the sort of like the lights within the hotel, Hatoya Hotel, the sort of like incandescent lights. And because those are hot spots, it's similar to the sinister effects of like halation, but instead of getting halations, you get sort of like a sunburst effect, like stars streaking across. It wasn't apparent inside the building. However, when I shot a bathtub in the hotel actually, and there was a sun sort of like rising during the morning actually, that was really apparent. And obviously some people might like this or not. However, in my mind, depending on the shooting scenario or the location that you're shooting, when there's sun, and if you're directly shooting against the sun, this will probably happen. So that's like one area to point out with it. And because the overall concept of the Color Skopar is tiny, small, compact, lightweight, this is by far, if I'm right, their smallest, Cosina's smallest lens that they produce for the Fujifilm's X mount. It's actually lighter than and smaller than the Ultron 27 F2, which is something spectacular. And this is something that I might go a little bit off topic, but the Color Skopar F2.8 is rather a slow lens in terms of f-stops. So normally these types of lenses come in, like I said, the Ultron 27 F2 or faster. Lenses tend to become larger if the aperture becomes, I guess, bigger in a sense. Because the f-stop is not that big, it means that it might not do well, especially in indoors and more darker environments. I was basically able to sort of like run away shooting with around f2.8, f4 with this lens inside a hotel. But if you're in a really dark environment, it's not the best lens to shoot around it, unfortunately. So that's one area to keep in mind. And as for a reference, I will stick in a bunch of photos for you guys, everything mostly shot in Provia. And in these types of video, I basically don't touch the colors, contrast, or any kind of like settings at all. Straight out of the camera from my Fujifilm's X-T5, showcase what the true potential of this lens is and how it will look if you shoot with it. I might have like cropped some of the photos because there was something in the frame, but honestly, it's straight out of the camera for your reference. It's rather intriguing about the 18mm f2.8 lens, which is equivalent to 28mm, is obviously if you're in the art field, you know that this focal length of 28mm is the fonded, most regarded focal length that Daido Moriyama, which is a famous Japanese artist, used. And this is also a famous focal length for a lot of photographers because a lot of people say that if you shoot with 28mm, you can tell if that photographer or artist suck at using or suck at, I guess, photography, because 28mm, because you're in a sort of like a wide angle view, you basically have to consider what you want in the frame, and it's easy to sort of like make that photo look really bad due to the fact that there's like so many events happening within that frame, and a true photographer, true artist can control that environment by sort of like not shooting vertically. They can basically shoot it sideways or in a specific angle to prevent any kind of intrusion going into the photo. It's like really hard to explain, but if you ever shot with a 28mm f2.28mm focal length, it's really difficult to get a good photo, but it's super easy to get a really bland photo. So it was actually a challenge for me to shoot with this lens because I'm used to shooting around 35mm f1.2, so that's like 50mm or in the telephoto range, because it's much more easier to shoot in those focal length because you can basically delete any obtrusive objects coming into the frame because you have a like a narrow focus of view. So yeah, that's like one of the things that I've actually encountered using this lens. This is a really hard to use lens, but if you keep shooting with it, I have to admit, I have to start loving it because it kind of shows you a new perspective of shooting with your camera, and at the same time you basically have to consider what's around in the frame more compared to like shooting with a telephoto lens. Okay, so shooting with three Voigtlander lenses so far, I have to admit this 18mm f2.8 Voigtlander Color Skopar lens was a really challenging lens compared to the other two, because due to the fact that I'm used to shooting in the more telephoto ranges like 50, 60 or somewhere around there, it's actually easier to shoot in those focal lengths due to the fact that you can basically sort of like, because you have a narrow focus of or viewpoint, you can basically just remove objects that are like obstructing your view. However, if you're shooting with a wide angle, you have so many things, so many events, so many like random things that come into frame, which can, I guess, put away the viewer's like focus away from what you're trying to shoot. And at the same time, because it's a wide angle, you have to shoot considerably closer to get your subject. So this is a really intriguing sort of like lens, and also a challenge for me when using it, because I basically had to take that into account, and it's a new perspective that I'm not used to shooting. However, if you get the shot, it is a really rewarding lens in a sense. And I have to admit, I don't understand why they call this the entry-level lens from the Cosina side, because I was like, 28mm F2.8, that's a harsh lens for an entry first user to come into the sort of like field of the Voigtlander's lenses. So yeah, they should really change that of saying this as an entry-level lens. But I guess more smartphone users are used to that focal length. If I'm right, iPhones is 28mm or 30mm, somewhere around there. So yeah. Okay, so pushing myself off a cliff, actually going even one step further for you guys. All my Voigtlander lens videos is like unedited, straight out of the camera from the X-T5 or X-T3 if I'm right. But if I were to edit my sort of like photos, my digital files, sort of like similar fashion to sort of like a film scan, so adding the grain structure. One information that you guys should know is that I use a software called Capture One Pro, and this video is not being sponsored by them, because I work as an e-commerce photographer like most of my life from Monday to Friday. That is my default software that I use to edit my photos. But within their software, there's an area where you can basically toggle the amount of grain that you can add onto the image. And under Capture One Pro's like system, or I guess software, there's like 6 film add-ons or effects I can add onto it, which is fine grain, silver rich, soft grain, cubic grain, tabular grain, and harsh grain. I won't cover that in this video. I'm not sure if I will in the future, but I basically use silver rich most of the time for my digital shoots. But if I'm shooting something that I want to simulate that, film-like effects, I use soft grain or maybe cubic grain. And below that like area, there's 2 like sliders. One is like how should I say, impact like slider, and below that there's something called granularity if I'm right. The impact one is how strong that effect, the grain structure effect that you can add onto that original image. And granularity, on the other hand, is how much grain is within that one single pixel. So you can basically sort of like adjust accordingly to your taste. And I basically do that depending on the photo. I will basically change the amount of granularity and the impact of that image. But for your information, I can basically showcase how it would look. And honestly, if it was a typical digital file, I would add a little bit of grain. And if it was probably something like a monochrome type of black and white photo, I think some people use the harsher type of grain structure and add that for the image. So yeah, that's like one of the ways I actually edit my photos. So yeah, that's basically it on my video of talking about the Cosinas Voigtlander's Color Skopar 18mm F2.8. Hopefully I got the pronunciation correct, and hopefully this video is not too long. But for the benefit of the film community, I thought it would be nice to mention this lens to you guys. So yeah, that's basically it on my coverage on my 3rd lens of the year, or the coming years to come. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it informative. If you have any questions regarding the Voigtlander lenses for the Fujifilm system, I'm happy to reply. And yeah, and one of my comments in my previous video said that I should next try the Voigtlander's macro apple lens 35mm F2, if I'm right. But yeah, depending on how that would go and how my life would progress, I will be looking into that lens sometime in the future. But yeah, we will see you next time. Peace out.